Hello everyone and welcome to Reimagining Expense Management Smart Automation Era. So when we talk about digital transformation, we usually focus on employee experience, AI innovation and cloud strategy. But there is one area that quietly impacts, and that is expense management. So today we explore a modern intelligent expense management, how it looks like. I am joined by Mr. Anand Rao, Director at Galvantrix, the organization behind Smart ExpenseSense, a Salesforce-native enterprise-grade solution which is transforming how expense management is handled. Anand, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Balak. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to speak about an area which is increasingly getting importance strategically.
Absolutely. So let's begin with the bigger picture. When we talk about global enterprises, especially Fortune 500 companies, expense management often becomes extremely complex, and we are talking about multi-entity, multi-currency scenarios that we are talking. So for everybody's understanding and from your experience, what are the most pressing challenges that the companies are right now facing?
Yeah, you addressed some of the key areas very accurately. Most enterprises have disconnected systems, disconnected ERP systems, expense management systems, and a whole lot of others. Typically, a large enterprise could have a couple of hundred systems to go with. Now, there's a lot of processing which is manual, especially in expense management claims, which means that there is no real-time information. There's no real-time synchronizations or no real-time financial integration. Now, apart from these, there are also areas of compliance. There are also areas of internal rules and regulations, and of course, most importantly, the ability to be to come up with accurate financial results on a regular basis. Fraud detection and prevention is also another very important aspect. Now, with automated systems, you'll be surprised to learn that the processing time can reduce by as much as 80%. The cost per transaction, which typically would be something like $3 to $5 per expense claim in more medium to large organizations, so about 300 to 500 Indian rupees, can go down to as little as 50 cents, which is about 50 Indian rupees.
Okay, that's interesting. So we are talking reactive versus proactive systems, and I believe another challenge is visibility. So the higher management, like the CFOs and everybody, want a consolidated expense insight in a report, and but without automation, I think this becomes a little difficult. So would you say that expense management has now become a strategic finance function instead of an administrative one?
Oh, absolutely. The administrative one, routine operational one is the key, that's the foundation. So that affects cash flow visibility. But it also helps to in financial forecasting. It also helps in managing budgets, especially when there's a lot of change in the environment. Internal compliance and, more importantly, external compliance in today's world is also another very key aspect of having an automated solution.
Okay, so you mean that traditional systems are no longer sufficient, and which brings us to the next big question, and that is, what does modern enterprise grade system actually look like? So Anand, tell us something about Smart ExpenseSense and what makes it different from the other app exchange or enterprise expense management tools.
Okay, yeah, thanks for asking that question. There are two essential dimensions. One is the internal working of the system itself, how does it facilitate, but the more important thing is how does it integrate, particularly with your ERP systems.
Right.
Now, we have native integration built into our system. It also works with other ERP systems, so it can be configured easily, which means that there is real-time data synchronization. Now, these are the integration aspects of it. Now, from the perspective of the system, first and foremost, any system which is across an enterprise, across different countries, has to have multi-currency support, right?
Absolutely.
So that's the top priority. There has to be validations at every step, which has to do with internal compliance. It also has to do with rules and regulations that you're using in each country. There is, of course, the concept of policy enforcement, and finally, there has to be approval for everything, right? Because this is a financial system. So complex hierarchies for approval is another important thing.
Okay, so that Salesforce-native architecture is important. That is what we have understood. So especially for large enterprises already operating with customers 360. So how does this reduce the total cost of ownership compared to the traditional enterprise systems?
Okay. That's again a very important point. Because traditional large enterprise systems for expense management, first of all, the per user licensing is fairly high. Secondly, it takes a lot of time to deploy and it has a lot of operational disruption. So it could take as much as 6 to 12 months to implement across even a region, for example. Third one is that there's a lot of custom integration that you need to build in, which means that you need to use a lot of the middleware part of it. Now, since Smart ExpenseSense is native on Salesforce, so therefore the deployment time is extremely low because we have pre-built accelerators, native connectors. There is no need for a dependency on external middleware because middleware is also an integral part of Salesforce. And because of the lower time for implementation, the costs reduce, the per user licensing cost is low, as well as the maintenance costs on a longer term basis.
And what about the large and mid-size organization that use SAP extensively? Because they use it for all the business processes, as I've seen, and which are strongly integrated with the financials also.
Yeah, absolutely. So since we have pre-built connectors, so therefore we are able to operationalize journal postings automatically. So upon approval, it automatically goes and posts journals for payment requests, for the payments itself. Now, since employees are typically set up as vendors in most ERPs like SAP, so therefore it can follow a payroll run or it can process every week, for example, as required. Settlements are almost instantaneous, so which means that does not become a bottleneck for your financial reporting.
Okay, so essentially this isn't just an expense tool and it's a financial automation engine integrated with the enterprise architecture. Very nice. So let's not talk about the measurable impact. Anand, enterprises want numbers. What kind of results are the organizations seeing?
Yeah, so from our experience, we've seen that the processing time reduces dramatically. Like I mentioned earlier, they've seen up to 80% reduction in the processing time end to end. That's one. Second thing is the errors are reduced to almost zero. And the third and most important thing which affects users is that the expense creation and submission time can be literally in minutes and it can be done from anywhere.
Okay.
So what it means then is that reconciliation efforts are reduced substantially, and also from an audit perspective, it helps when you have to look at various expense claims across the year.
Absolutely. So 80% reduction is transformative. So beyond operational efficiency, how does this impact the strategic decision making?
Again, very important question. So first of all, there is real-time visibility. So the moment a transaction is done and approved, it is visible in dashboards and reports.
Right.
Second is, and that's also equally important, is how do you categorize different types of expenses? Because that's something which is getting more and more important and from a spend analysis perspective. Now, these data, which are transactions data, help in forecasting. So it becomes, like I said, cash flow forecasting, etc.
Right.
Also optimization of costs, because that also can have a significant impact on your bottom line. And like we've discussed earlier, detection of frauds is, I think that's another important aspect in today's world. So the top management leadership gets visibility across the board.
That's nice. So we've discussed automation and integration. Now let's quickly come down to the most powerful enabler of transformation today, which is AI. So AI is redefining enterprises' systems globally. And how deeply is AI integrated with Smart ExpenseSense?
Well, AI is now a part of almost every system, and it has to be competitive. So the most important benefit from AI is the concept of image recognition, which is for recognizing receipts. So with today's state-of-the-art technology, 99% and above of receipts can be recognized correctly, categorized correctly, flagged for duplicates, flagged for company certain policy violation alerts, etc. So for example, if you have a limit of a certain amount, let's say $200 a day for hotels, if you spend consistently more than $250 in every trip, then that gets flagged. So that becomes an alert. This is a basis for predictive analytics as to how your spend analytics on expenses will be throughout the year. Which again links back to your cash flow forecasting, etc. And also detecting various types of anomalies that may certainly crop up. So basically, what it is doing is it's not transforming expense management as a process, but it's also transforming financial processes in a large way.
Okay, so instead of finance teams mutually or manually checking every line item, the system basically flags all the exceptions intelligently. That is what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So finance teams are really now focusing on strategic governance as opposed to administrative tasks.
Okay, that's nice. And looking ahead, if I ask, what is your long-term vision?
Yeah, that's another very good question. See, in the future, what will happen is expense systems will capture expenses automatically from receipts. They will post automatically. They will also be able to, once it's approved, post to the ERP systems automatically. Once the ERP systems post it and the payments are done, then it will be able to flag it to the respective users who have raised the expense claims. And more importantly, it can escalate alerts for management before a compliance regulation is breached, or for example, if it has any significant risk possibilities.
Okay, that's quite generative, and that's a very powerful vision that you have. And clearly this is aligned with the global digital transformation trends that are right now going on. So before we close, I'd like to have one final question. For Fortune 500 leaders watching this, the CFOs, the CIOs and the finance controllers, why is now the right time to reimagine the expense management?
Well, first of all, enterprise complexity is increasing dramatically because of global operations. Even small companies operate globally. Regulatory pressures, which keep changing all the time. For example, the tariff environment changes all the time, and it has an impact on pretty much everything, including the way you manage your expenses. Remote workforce is now, it's becoming a way of life. And most importantly, every organization is adopting a digital first strategy. So that also increases complexity fairly significantly. Now, because of this, what happens is that there is a pressure to speed up the financial cycles, particularly for stock market reporting, etc. Compliance becomes important. It's also about reducing operational costs, because you have to get better and better, which means you have to get cheaper. And in today's era, the Gen Z era, employee satisfaction is of paramount importance. Apart from, of course, the fact that it gives you a lot of financial insights. So the shift from manual systems to automated systems and then to now agentic systems is not an option, it is a necessity.
That's nice. So basically, expense management is no longer a back office solution. It has become a strategic pillar of enterprise intelligence. That is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So today's conversation made one thing very clear, that automation, AI and native integration are redefining how the global organizations are operating now. So thank you, Anand, for sharing your insights and vision. And to our global audience, whether you represent a Fortune 500 company or a fast scaling multinational, the era of smart automation is right here, and in finance it has begun. So this has been Reimagining Expense Management in the smart automation era. Thank you for joining us, Anand. It was absolutely wonderful to know about this particular product.
Thank you, Palak, and it was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to sharing details of how our customers have implemented and how they benefited from this system, and also a lot of other systems that
absolutely. So we will be back with a lot more segments to give you information about all the more of these products that come up in this dynamic industry. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.